I think John is one of the few that seem to not have as big of a problem with Jalen Hurts being picked at 53. I'm in that camp as well, and I know people have their reasonings, but obviously, John, it was the most polarizing pick, at least for the Eagles, if not the entire weekend.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was kind of funny because in their post-draft availability on Zoom, Doug Peterson said maybe it's not a sexy pick. It was the sexiest pick of the entire draft. Everybody lost their mind, both locally and nationally, because it's a strange pick. It's typically when you have a franchise quarterback. And by the way, you just paid that franchise quarterback more than anybody else in the history of the game last year. You generally don't take a quarterback that high in the draft. So,
would you say that one of the problems is that people are just viewing it as a backup quarterback, where the Eagles are saying that's not what we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think everybody has kind of gone into camps. Some think it's that. Some think it's Carson Wentz's durability. Some think it's the innovation tag, and it's really it's a collaboration of all of those things, and it's a bunch of different things and why the Eagles went in this direction. But you got to be able to hold more than one thought at one time to explain this pick. And I wrote about that at SportsIllustrated.com as best I could to try to explain what the Eagles' thinking was. And it involves a lot of different things. And every single one of those things is a part of it, along with the new CBA. Throw that into the mix as well. It's like a big stew. And then, Howie Roseman went on with John Clark as well and explained 2012 and Russell Wilson and what happened there. The Eagles badly wanted Russell Wilson at that point in that draft. They decided, we can wait to the third round instead of taking him in the second round. Didn't get him. And they still are hurting over that, even though they got Nick Foles. And they didn't want that to happen again. So all of this is part of their thinking. And whether you agree with it or not, I think you can see the logic if you're being fair. Now, I don't agree with the pick while I say that, but I do understand the logic of the pick.
And I guess the logic of the pick suggests a couple of things. Howie is really trying to hammer home, hey, we spent so much money in backup quarterbacks that we're going to be able to now spend less at that position, and that means we can spend more money in these areas where you wanted us to take a guy in the second round.
Yeah, and in theory, that is true because, backup quarterbacks and good backup quarterbacks, and especially veteran backup quarterbacks in this league, get significant salaries, certainly more than what will essentially be $1.5 million per year. Now, I asked Doug Peterson that question because if you look at the Doug Peterson era, he has preferred backups with significant experience, and not only experience in the way of years, and he brought up Nate Sudfeld, but in experience in the way of playing time. First Nick Foles, and then they went out and got Josh McCown. They're not going to have that with Jalen Hurts. So from that perspective, things change. And then you look at also Doug's history of quarterbacks. Look at them all. Carson Wentz, Nick Foles, Josh McCown, even throw Nate Sudfeld in there. They're all 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". This is a different template from a quarterback perspective as well. But then I circle back to Wilson again. It's always about the individual player. Doug was a big part of that process in 2012 as quarterback coach, and he was the one doing a lot of the evaluating of Russell Wilson. So they like this player, and they think this player could be a really good player. So we'll see if they get it right. They certainly value the backup position more than most teams, and understandably so. you got to be honest. I mean, Carson Wentz, maybe it's bad luck. Whatever you want to define his injuries as, he hasn't finished 3 consecutive seasons. And they've been in the playoffs 3 consecutive seasons, and he, in essence, hasn't been there.
Yeah. Well, how much?
Obviously concussed.
How much do you put in into play that they can get out of his deal in a couple of years, and that now the sand starts in the hourglass, that show us you can stay healthy and show us that you can get back to that 2017 guy, even though he didn't play badly last year. I don't know that you feel like he was the quarterback that you gave all that money to last year, but do you think that he's on the clock now for 2 more seasons before they have to make a decision?
No, I don't think it's about putting him on the clock. I think it's about that's any NFL contract, really. I mean, if you think about it, there's very, very few, as I said, where you can't get out of it after a cursory 2 or 3 years at the worst. So that's just sort of the normal way of doing business in the new NFL. But if you want to project down the road and say he gets hurt again and then gets hurt again, yeah, I mean, then I think it becomes a legitimate conversation. I mean, that's just fair. But I don't think as we sit here today, the Eagles are saying, oh, we drafted Jalen Hurts to put Carson Wentz on the clock. It's got more to do with the fact that they think the most valuable position in football, and Jimmy Johnson was really the first to say this, is quarterback, and the second most valuable position is backup quarterback. And no one knows that better than the Eagles because they won a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback.
Oh, yeah, and I find, and this isn't justifying the pick anymore, but in 2016, they went 7-9. In the second round, they took a guy who they got called arrogant for taking Sidney Jones, a guy that they knew was out all year. And it was, hey, you have way more holes to fill. How dare you take a guy who you know is not going to play? And they ended up winning the Super Bowl. So they arrogantly took a guy in the second round that they knew wasn't going to play and still won a Super Bowl. So I guess they have some reasoning to say we can take a chance in the second round with a guy that we really value.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the draft is, and if you like a player, you take the player. And the Eagles didn't think they could get him in the third round. Didn't think he would fall, and as I said, Howie mentioned the Russell Wilson example as a reason they felt they had to seize the opportunity to get the player they wanted. So I have no problem with that part of it. And then the second part is, yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, we're now in April, and obviously nobody's on the field, and everybody's great. I say this every year. Mike, we've been doing this a long time. Everybody's great. And then you get to training camp, we're not going to have an off season. We're not going to have OTAs and minicamp. And coaches say, oh, this guy's good, and even more so draft people and even more so fans. Everybody's great. And then you get them to training camp and you go, hey, you know what? This guy's not that good. We better go out and get a veteran player who understands how to play. Now, it's sometimes, and you can point, last year's a perfect example because you got Miles Sanders, who turned out to be pretty much a hit from his rookie season, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who was a disaster in his rookie season, both in the second round. But I think people will say, Miles, because he was the 53rd pick, exactly, and Jalen was the 53rd pick, and they say, well, look what you could have in the 53rd pick. And, part of that is true, but also people forget the struggles early in the season. Miles wasn't very good early in the season. There was a lot of issues with him. And that's the reason why Jordan Howard took the job. And only after Jordan Howard got hurt, Miles was able to take that step back, learned a little bit, slowed down, started feeling the game a little bit better, and he took off. And, that was, as I said, overall, it was a hit, no question about it. But the assumption that all these guys that got picked behind Jalen Hurts and that everyone is referencing are going to be these great players right away, that's not true.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is because somebody has a draft board, I would assume that 75 to 80% of the listening audience or that watches Eagles games wouldn't know Denzel Mims if he came up and gave him a stone cold stunner.
Well, they wouldn't know Jalen Rager. I mean, nobody. Come on, let's be honest.
Oh, exactly. I'm saying, but that's what I mean. But because there's somebody's draft board out there telling them, hey, this guy was available and you needed that position, you should have took him. And it's, well, I wanted Mims or I wanted this kid Chin. Not one guy listening saw Jeremy Chin play football this year. Not one. And yet that's the narrative is that there was a guy. But my question to you is exactly that. Was there someone at 53 that they egregiously passed on for their needs to do this?
Well, there's a ton of guys that have a ceiling that they passed on. I mean, you look at the linebackers who were available. You look at the running backs. I mean, they still haven't gotten that compliment from Miles Sanders, who we just mentioned. There were corners available. There were safeties available. There are a lot of guys that would have fit this team better, literally too many to mention, from a need standpoint. But we always talk about need, and that's not a good way to go about building your team. And that was one of my criticism of the first round, not necessarily of the pick, but the Eagles put themselves in a position essentially where they had to take a receiver, no matter what they said and how he admitted it after the draft. But we had talked about it because I was able to talk to him a lot pre-draft, that this was their strategy in saying, we want to get a young receiver to grow with Carson Wentz. We didn't want a veteran receiver who is exposed to other offenses, other quarterbacks, other schemes. He went on record, admitted that after the draft. I don't think that's the right way to go about it, to put yourself in and pigeonhole yourself into a certain position. Now, where he probably got saved, at least a little bit, was this draft was so deep at wide receiver. So you can say they need this, they need that, they need this. And I would have rather had a bunch of linebackers before Davion Taylor, but they like the player. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a problem with teams liking a player and going to get that player.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. It was they. And I don't like to sit here, and they mentioned Taysom Hill, which I don't think is fair to Hurts to say that's who you're going to.
I mentioned Taysom Hill.
Well, a lot of people have, but I'm saying
they never mentioned Taysom Hill.
Well, Taysom Hill just got paid $21 million, and he touched the ball 46 times. So, and I've been having these conversations. I said, look, if you're using a guy 8 to 10 plays a game, those 8 to 10 plays are valuable touches for somebody that maybe a second-round pick. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside didn't give you 8 to 10 plays, So I think the fact that Hill has been such a success, well, people's argument is, well, they got him as an undrafted free agent. That's the problem. He's been so impactful that you can no longer get that guy as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, and a couple things. I think Jalen Hurts is a legitimate quarterback. I don't think Taysom Hill is.
Yes, I agree with that.
So, number one. And then the second part is, I asked Doug the question, and I said Taysom Hill talking about schemes, and that's how that kind of unfurled. And then he admitted, Jalen's got a unique skill set. And then you kind of rewind back because we all know, Press Taylor got asked last year about the evolution of football. One of the things he said was, he thinks the next innovation is going to be two guys on the field at the same time that can throw the football. Mm-hmm. And this is where I talked about the innovation part of it. The Eagles pride themselves on being forward-thinking, pride themselves on being innovative. Sometimes they're a little bit too haughty about it, to be perfectly honest, but that's what they believe. And I think, part of this has to do with the evolution of football as well. in where football is going.
Yeah.
And having two guys on the field at the same time that can do those types of things. Now, to be honest, I've criticized Sean Payton, and I still criticize him. When you have Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterback, obviously first ballot, one of the greatest pure passers of all time, I don't think you should have to take him off the field. I don't think it helps. And people can point to the playoff game against Minnesota, and Taysom Hill was tremendous in that game. He was the best player on the field for the Saints. They lost the game, but he was the best player on the field.
Yeah.
He made these impactful plays, but he doesn't do that consistently. And I think it's dumb to take your quarterback off the field. And I'll say the same thing with Carson Wentz. So I don't agree with the Eagles' sentiment in that part of it.
You agree with the Saints paying him $21 million?
No, no. No, I don't.
$16 million guaranteed money.
Hey, Mike, I just joked about that on Twitter because, Sean said when they were still wrangling with Drew Brees, he said Taysom Hill's a franchise quarterback. Well, guess what? They're signing Jameis Winston, who's going to be the backup. So what do they have? 3 franchise quarterbacks? It's absurd.
Yeah, well, and I look back to that game when the Eagles played the Saints, and you looked at two teams that were going neck and neck, back and forth. And other than the Alshon drop, what do you remember about that game? Was that they had the gadget play with Hill, and that extended that drive. How did the Eagles win the Super Bowl? Well, they threw a gadget play in there that really changed that whole game. I mean, this gadget player, I hate using the word gadget or gimmick because I don't think it's fair to those guys that do it, because I think they have a role in today's game that is just another tool that makes your team more difficult to defend when you have that guy that you never know when he's going to come into play.
Yeah, I agree. And, if you think about it from, say, a wide receiver's perspective, and we'll bring up Rager again because he's going to be a manufactured touch guy. There is a designation for those types of players. They're not considered gadget players anymore. When you're running orbit motion and jet sweeps and trying to stretch the field horizontally, that's the type of player the Eagles wanted. And that's the type of player they think Jalen Rager is going to be. But again, people don't look at them as gadgets because, Tyreek Hill has changed that mentality almost. At quarterback, if you're doing weird things, if you're doing things that are not considered conventional, you're a gimmick. So, yeah, a lot of it is just how people label things. I mean, it's not like Tyreek Hill is getting the football 100 times on jet sweeps. When he does, it's sort of a gimmick play. You're doing it three times a game, but people don't look at it that way.
And guess what? The Eagles don't really have the player to do it 3 times a game. So if you can add that. Now, this weekend, you might say they have 15 guys who might be able to do it now. I mean, God almighty.
Yeah, I would say.
What is?
And I said, look, I told people to slow their roll for a couple reasons. One, COVID-19, obviously, there's no off season. So I think throughout the league, league-wide, this is going to be a bad year for rookies. I really do. It's going to be tough for them to ramp up. In a best-case scenario, if you start the season on time, you're going to have training camp, a little bit of training camp. They're going to be behind the 8 ball. Maybe in the second half of the season, they can start understanding things a little bit better, get a little bit more comfortable. But I think league-wide, it's going to be a struggle for a lot of rookies in this league. And then he might explode year 2. So I think people need to understand that part of it. But also, guys like Hightower and Watkins, they can run. But, as we stand right here today, Mike,
yep,
they're probably not even going to be on the team.
Well, I was going to say,
they're going to be on the practice squad.
What's that wide receiver room look like right now? I mean, they have enough room in the room to get all these guys in there?
Yeah, they got 15 on the off, but that's not rare. In your offseason, you got 90 guys.
Yeah, but these are guys that they drafted. You don't like to get rid of your draft picks. They traded for a guy, and then you got guys that were hurt last year that are going to be coming back. So it seems like you're going to be cutting draft picks.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you got to get them through waivers, but remember the practice squad is going to be expanded this year, so they'll both be back on the practice squad. But you'll kind of feel it out. I mean, you think about these Goodwin, they could just cut him, move on if they need to. We still don't know about Alshon Jeffrey. I'm still in the camp that he's not going to be here. But let's say Alshon's here. Well, how many spots do you have? Deshaun's back.
Right.
Doug just basically said Greg Ward, a big part of this offense. So the Greg Ward truthers are going to be happy.
And they bring Paul Turner back too?
You got Deshaun Jackson. You got JJ. How many receivers are you going to keep? Maybe 6, possibly 5.
Yeah.
That's one open spot.
Which means
if Goodwin's there.
And by the way, the first-round pick's not getting cut.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah.
So those guys are probably practice squad bound. Now, as I said, if they really like Watkins or Hightower and they don't think they can get them through waivers, they probably cut Goodwin and keep one of them on the back end of the roster. But they're not going to be impactful parts of the team. No shot, unless there's a ton of injuries.
Real quick, the safety, Kayvon Wallace, is he a guy that, it suffices? Does he get playing time?
I don't know if he gets playing time this year for exactly what I said, but I thought that was maybe the best pick the Eagles had in the entire draft. It was either him or the kid from Auburn in the 6th round. I don't want to ruin his name because I haven't got it yet, but the phonetics of it. But that
I had a very good pronunciation of it earlier. That I will try to.
Wanago is I'm assuming, but most people had him graded just from an athletic trait standpoint as the second worst third-round pick, and he had a meniscus tear. So he got knocked down a lot of boards, and he was off a lot of boards because of the medical situation. But, I mean, he is a really, really talented player. So when I think about value, those are the 2 best picks in the entire draft. And it's Wallace and it's Prince.
Prince Tega Wanago.
Yeah. He's got a chance to just step right in and be that swing tackle, that Halapula Vati Vaitai.
Right.
I can say that right away.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I saw Brugler at The Athletic had him as a top 50 player.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I guess
he's got way more talent than Vaitai. I mean, just way more talent. So if that works out for the Eagles, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, that's a hell of a draft choice. But again, it might take some time. It might be year 2 before this thing explodes. And I think Kayvon Wallace, I mean, I've talked a lot about the safety position. Look, there are some issues there. And ultimately, I don't know if you have any real starters at safety. I got more concerns at safety than the average fan base does. I mean, Rodney McLeod was clearly a descending player last year. Mm-hmm. He's back. Jalen Mills, they're moving back. He's never done it before, unless you go back to college. To assume he's going to hit the ground running. Will Parks, again, you look at the contract. It doesn't tell you everything, but remember, there's 31 other teams in this league evaluating these players, and none of them thought Will Parks was worthy of more than a 1-year deal for essentially $2 million. That's not a good sign. They need help at the safety position. And I think when we are in 2021, hopefully if we play football and hopefully if we get life going again, I think year 2, I think Kayvon Wallace is going to be a starting safety for this team.
Real quick, before we let you roll, John McMullen, of course, at JF McMullen, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. The NFL reporting from the Sports Business Journal daily that the NFL considers October 15th as a drop-dead date for a 16-game season that would be completed in February. So it sounds like there is some contingencies happening. May 7th will be the schedule, but they are starting to open their eyes that they might not be able to kick off in September?
Yeah, we mentioned that a couple weeks ago. There's going to be contingencies, and that's why the schedule's typically released mid-April before the draft. They pushed it back. Originally it was going to be May 9th, now evidently May 7th. And that was about developing these contingencies. And there's going to be 16-game contingencies, and you just mentioned the drop dead date's going to be mid-October. I think they're going to have a 14-game contingency down to a 12-game contingency. I think that's the lowest they would go. But, yeah, that's the whole reason this has been delayed, because you got to come up with other plans in this type of environment.
Overall, the draft, anything that you think we'll see moving forward that they, said, wow, I didn't know we could do X, Y, and Z. We're going to have to do that moving forward.
Well, I think a lot of people, as it went on, I think it was a little bit of a rocky start, especially in the first half hour. But I think a lot of people enjoyed the no-frills aspect and more of an emphasis on the actual players rather than the hoopla the typical draft does. And it was going to be over the top this year. I think, they were doing it in Vegas. They were going to do it by the fountains. They were going to have a boat taking the players over the Roger Goodell. I mean, they were going to just overdo it to a ludicrous degree. But ultimately, I think TV networks will want that spectacle again when they're able to have it. And unfortunately, I think it's going to go back to that.
All right, John McMullen at JF McMullen. Plenty more tomorrow during football at 4. So much to dive into. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other players and some of the other things that have happened, of course, with the draft. A lot was kind of focused on Hurts today. That was kind of the big discussion over the weekend. And, of course, John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, man. And he's back again tomorrow for football at 4.